The gallery owner's fall. Gregory Fitzroy's world, on the other hand, had begun to crumble. Once a respected figure in the art world, he found himself reduced to nothing more than a relic of a bygone era. The gallery that had been his pride and joy for so many years was now under the ownership of the very artist he had once rejected. Fitzroy's inability to see the potential in James's work had cost him not only a valuable artist but also his influence in the art world. With the rise of the Whitaker Gallery, Fitzroy's old clients began to turn their backs on him. They flocked to James, who was now seen as a leader in the industry, a champion of new voices. Gregory's name no longer carried the weight it once had, and the collectors who had once been loyal to his gallery now saw him as an outdated figure, a man who couldn't evolve with the times. Desperate, Gregory reached out to James, hoping to rebuild some kind of connection, to salvage what was left of his career. He sent letters, made phone calls, and even tried to schedule meetings. But James refused to meet him. To him, Gregory was a symbol of everything that had been wrong with the art world, the elitism, the exclusion, and the dismissal of diverse voices. James had no desire to rekindle their relationship, especially not on Gregory's terms. James's refusal to engage with Fitzroy wasn't just about personal animosity, it was about the principles he stood for. He saw Gregory's desperation as a reflection of a system that had failed artists like him for so long. Gregory had not only dismissed James as an artist but had also reinforced the exclusionary nature of the art world. To engage with him now would only serve to validate the very system James was trying to dismantle. As the months passed, Fitzroy's situation grew more dire. His reputation continued to slip, and the gallery that had once been a symbol of his success was now just another failed venture. The wealthy patrons who had once supported him now saw him as an out-of-touch figure, a reminder of the old, exclusive art world that was being swept away by the tide of change. Gregory had no one to blame but himself. He walked into the gallery with the quiet confidence of someone who had been waiting for this moment all his life. The polished marble floors and pristine white walls felt intimidating, but James held his head high, hoping the art would speak for itself. The gallery owner, Gregory Fitzroy, a man with an air of superiority and a long history in the art world, greeted him with a quick glance. Fitzroy's eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to measure James instantly. "Can I help you?" Fitzroy asked, his voice cool, almost disinterested. I wanted to show you some of my work," James stammered, his heart racing but his hand steady as he set his portfolio on the counter. Fitzroy glanced down at the folder, flipping through it lazily. His eyes lingered only briefly on each piece. He murmured, "I see you have a lot of raw emotion in these, but it's not really the style we're looking for." James stood still, his throat tightening. He had heard this kind of dismissal before, but something about Fitzroy's tone felt different, more cutting. He could sense the gallery owner's disdain for him, not just for his art but for him as a person. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it wasn't admiration, no, it was something much darker. "What do you mean?" James asked, trying to keep his voice calm, despite the sting of rejection. "Well," Fitzroy continued, a smug smile creeping onto his face, "there's something about these pieces. They're passionate, but they're not refined. Not really for the high-end market. They're a bit too rough, don't you think?" James felt his stomach drop. The words hung in the air, each one digging deeper than the last. His fingers clenched around the edge of the portfolio as Fitzroy glanced up at him with a look that was almost pitying. "You've got some nice energy," Fitzroy said with a slight chuckle, "but this kind of work? It's not the sort of thing that's going to sell. Not in a place like this." The artist felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of disbelief and anger rising within him. How could this man, who had no understanding of his work, make such a judgment? He tried to remain composed. "But I've seen the kind of art you show here. I think my work could find a place in your gallery." Fitzroy cut him off, waving a hand dismissively. "Look, no offense, but we're looking for something more marketable. More mainstream." His eyes glinted with an unmistakable arrogance. "This type of art is a dime a dozen. You'll find a more suitable gallery that appreciates your style. Good luck. It was the condescending way in which Fitzroy had dismissed him. He wasn't just rejecting his art, he was rejecting everything James represented. The artist's resilience. As James left the gallery, the rain had turned into a heavy downpour. The streets were slick with water, the sound of the rain against the pavement a steady beat in his ears. He walked aimlessly, the rejection weighing heavily on his chest. The disappointment was almost overwhelming, but in that moment, he felt a fire light up within him. He refused to let the words of a man who couldn't even see his worth define him. That night, in the quiet of his apartment, James threw himself into his work. The sting of the rejection became fuel for his next creation. He painted with a fervor he hadn't felt before, every stroke on the canvas an act of defiance. His art became an outlet for his frustration, a place to channel the anger and hurt he had felt from Fitzroy's condescending remarks. Each line, each color, was a way to fight back, against the system, against the people who dismissed him without understanding, against the gallery owner who thought his work was nothing more than a passing trend. Over the following weeks, James continued to pour his heart into his paintings. He stopped seeking validation from galleries and critics, instead focusing on his craft. He knew that his art had the power to touch people in ways that no one could predict, and he wasn't going to let one man's narrow view of the world stand in his way. Slowly, he began submitting his work to smaller galleries, ones that championed up-and-coming artists from diverse backgrounds. It wasn't easy. There were more rejections, more moments of doubt, but with each setback, James only grew stronger. He was no longer painting to impress anyone, he was painting for himself. Each canvas told the story of his journey, and he was determined to share it with the world. And so, he kept going, even when the world seemed to tell him he wasn't good enough. The gallery owner's mockery would not define him. It would only make him stronger, sharper, more determined to rise above the limitations placed on him by others. Little did he know, his time would soon come. The gallery owner's prejudice. Racial bias at play. Gregory Fitzroy prided himself on his ability to spot talent. He had built a successful career in the art world, one that was grounded in exclusivity and high-value pieces. His gallery was known for showcasing only the most refined and prestigious works, paintings that would appeal to wealthy collectors and investors, the kind of people who had the money and taste to appreciate the fine arts. It was a world that revolved around reputation and social status, where the artist's background rarely mattered as long as they fit the right mold. But Gregory's world was also narrow. He had never considered expanding beyond what he knew, beyond the artists and collectors who frequented the high-end art scene. Gregory's prejudices weren't overt, they were subtle, ingrained in his everyday choices, decisions, and assumptions. He came from a predominantly white, affluent family and had inherited the gallery from his father, who had built it from the ground up. Growing up in such an environment, Gregory had been conditioned to view art through a specific lens. He had been taught that art, true art, was about refinement, sophistication, and, often, wealth. The value of a painting was often determined by its artist's background, social standing, and how well their work would be received in circles of power and influence. When Gregory first laid eyes on James Whitaker's work, he didn't see raw emotion or artistic brilliance. What he saw was rough, unrefined, and unsellable. But more than that, there was something in the back of Gregory's mind, a long-held assumption about Black artists. He believed that artists like James, coming from communities he barely understood, created work that was too primitive to appeal to his high-profile clientele. He assumed that Black artists had little to offer beyond what the art world had already deemed acceptable for their communities. James's paintings, full of vibrant color and untamed emotion, did not fit into the neat, controlled world that Gregory had built. In Gregory's mind, it wasn't just the style of James's work that was flawed, it was the fact that James was Black. There was a part of Gregory that believed Black artists, no matter how skilled, could not create works of art that would command the same level of prestige as those from more polished or academically trained artists. As the years passed, Gregory's views remained unchanged. His gallery continued to thrive, but his worldview remained narrow. He continued to ignore the growing presence of diverse voices in the art world, dismissing them as a passing trend. He didn't take notice of the rising tide of recognition for Black artists like James, believing their time in the spotlight would soon fade. He preferred the familiar, art that was safe, art that could guarantee the reputation and profits that came with it. The artist's growing recognition. It wasn't long before art critics began to take notice. Reviews started to appear in smaller but influential publications that championed the work of diverse artists. James's art was bold, unapologetic, and spoke to the moment, a moment where the world was beginning to demand more representation, more authenticity. He was featured in exhibitions that celebrated the new wave of artists who were pushing boundaries and creating art that was more inclusive, more reflective of the world's diversity. Collectors who were beginning to tire of the same old highbrow art scene started to flock to James's work. His pieces were vibrant, alive with energy, and they held a deep emotional weight that resonated with people who had grown tired of the stale, controlled world of elite galleries. It was in these smaller, progressive galleries that James's name began to spread. His work was being snapped up by those who saw the value in raw expression, people who recognized the talent and the unique voice that James brought to the art world. The art world, much to Gregory Fitzroy's surprise, was changing. Where once his gallery had been the pinnacle of success, it now seemed to be at odds with the new wave of inclusivity that was sweeping through the art community. It was no longer enough to showcase only the traditional artists who had been deemed worthy of recognition by the old guard. Art was no longer just about status, it was about authenticity, diversity, and expression. And James Whitaker was one of the artists at the forefront of this new movement. The gallery owners missed opportunity. As James's work gained more attention, whispers of his rising fame reached the upper echelons of the art world. Wealthy collectors, who had once been loyal to Gregory Fitzroy's gallery, began to look elsewhere for their next great investment. They had begun to see the value in diverse art, in pieces that challenged the status quo and reflected the changing cultural landscape. James was now a name that could not be ignored, his works were being featured in exclusive private exhibitions, and his paintings were becoming a must-have for those looking to elevate their collections with something new, something more relevant to the times. But Gregory Fitzroy, ever the elitist, remained unmoved. Despite the mounting success of James's career, Gregory refused to acknowledge the artist's talent. In his mind, James's work was still too raw and unpolished. Gregory's obsession with maintaining the image of exclusivity in his gallery blinded him to the opportunities that were right in front of him. He refused to believe that the world was ready for artists like James, artists who defied convention, who did not fit the mold of the perfect painter. James's name was now circulating among the wealthiest patrons of the art world, the same patrons who had once been loyal to Fitzroy's gallery. Yet, Gregory continued to dismiss the idea of revisiting James's work. His pride was too great, his prejudice too ingrained to admit that he might have been wrong. But the truth was undeniable. James was becoming the artist to watch. His work was being sold at higher prices than Gregory ever could have imagined for a young, Black artist. As James's reputation grew, Fitzroy's gallery slowly began to lose its prestige, its exclusivity tarnished by its inability to keep up with the changing tides. Gregory's stubbornness had led him to miss out on an opportunity that would have brought his gallery the kind of success it had always craved. And yet, he refused to admit it, his biases, his deeply ingrained prejudices, kept him from seeing what was clearly in front of him. James's rise was not just a triumph of his talent, it was a reflection of the art world's evolution. Gregory Fitzroy, in his narrow worldview, had missed the chance to be part of that change. He had clung to a vision of art that no longer had a place in the world James was helping to create. And now, as James's name echoed in the corridors of the art world, Gregory Fitzroy's gallery remained stuck in the past, a relic of an age that was quickly fading into history. The artist's success. The turning point. James Whitaker's life changed in a way he had never imagined, and it all happened in one exhilarating night. The prestigious auction house, Broughton and Gray, had decided to feature a collection of his works in their latest event, an exclusive, high-profile affair attended by the world's wealthiest collectors. His paintings, once dismissed as unrefined and unsellable, were now the hottest items in the art world. The auction was filled with excitement and anticipation as the bidding began. His large, vibrant canvas, Emergence, a breathtaking piece depicting a powerful figure breaking free from a whirlwind of colors, was the centerpiece of the collection. As the auctioneer raised his gavel, the room fell silent, and the bids started pouring in. Each bid seemed to push the price higher, with wealthy collectors from around the globe vying to claim the piece as their own. The tension was palpable as the price reached a level no one had expected. Finally, with a loud crack of the gavel, the painting was sold for over $10 million, setting a new record for a contemporary black artist. The gallery owner's envy. Gregory Fitzroy had always prided himself on his ability to spot trends in the art world, but James Whitaker's meteoric rise left him reeling. The whispers of James's success reached Gregory through his network of wealthy clients, and each mention made him feel more and more embarrassed by his earlier dismissal of the artist's work. The realization hit hard. James Whitaker, the very artist he had once mocked, was now one of the hottest names in the art world. As the weeks passed, Gregory found himself checking auction results, reading articles, and following James's growing career from a distance. Every time he saw James's name attached to a new exhibition or a high-profile sale, the weight of guilt gnawed at him. Gregory had missed an opportunity to represent an artist who was now worth millions, an opportunity to be part of something that would define his legacy in the art world. The decision to reject James had not only cost him financially but had also left him feeling humiliated. He had been so sure of his own judgment, so convinced that James's art was unsellable, but now that same art was being celebrated and revered by the very people Gregory had sought to impress. His once exclusive clientele, those who had spent years collecting the traditional, highbrow art that Gregory had championed, were now turning their attention to James Whitaker's work. Collectors who had been loyal to Fitzroy's gallery were now purchasing James's paintings at auction, adding them to their collections in droves. Gregory had built his entire reputation on curating art that was considered refined and elite, but James's work had shown him that art could be more than just an investment. It could be a reflection of culture, identity, and raw emotion. The more Gregory observed James's rise, the more he realized that his own view of art had been limited. He had allowed his racial biases to cloud his judgment, and in doing so, he had missed out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But it wasn't just about the money or the prestige, it was the personal humiliation that stung the most. Gregory had built his entire career on a foundation of elitism and exclusivity, and James Whitaker had proven that he was wrong. He had failed to recognize the value in art that didn't fit into his narrow vision of what good art should look like. In his desperate attempts to maintain control over the gallery, Gregory had become a relic of the past, and James, with his bold, unapologetic vision, was the future. The artists returned to the gallery. One crisp autumn day, as James sat in his expansive new studio, an idea began to form in his mind. His success had opened doors for him in ways he had never imagined, but there was one thing left to do. He had something to prove, not to anyone else, but to himself. He wanted to return to the gallery that had once rejected him, not to seek revenge, but to show Gregory Fitzroy that he had made a mistake. He wanted to show him what his art had become, not out of spite, but because he had earned the right to be respected on his own terms. James arranged a meeting with Gregory, who, to his surprise, agreed. The gallery owner, now aware of how much he stood to lose, was eager to make amends. He greeted James with an air of desperation, as if he were meeting a new client rather than an artist he had once dismissed. "Mr. Whitaker, it's an honor to finally meet with you," Gregory said, trying to mask his discomfort with a forced smile. "I've been following your work closely, and I have to say, I was wrong. You've built an extraordinary career, and I'd like to discuss how we might work together moving forward." James observed Gregory carefully. He could sense the gallery owner's desperation, the way he was attempting to humble himself, to ingratiate himself into the artist's good graces. Gregory's words were carefully chosen, and his tone was laden with the kind of calculated diplomacy that had made him so successful in the past. But James wasn't fooled. He saw through the facade. This wasn't about admiration for his art, it was about salvaging Gregory's own reputation. "I'm glad you've recognized the value of my work," James said calmly, his voice steady but filled with the quiet confidence that had grown within him over the years. "But I won't be coming back here to exhibit my pieces." Gregory's face faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. "I understand if you're hesitant, but I think this could be a great opportunity for both of us. We could organize a special exhibit, something that would make a statement." "No," James interrupted gently. "I don't need your gallery to succeed. I'm here to show you that my art has always had value. It wasn't about the venue, it was about the work itself. And I've found spaces where my work is truly appreciated. I don't think your gallery can offer me the respect my art deserves." Gregory's eyes widened, and he searched for the words to respond, but none came. The realization had finally hit him, he had missed his chance, and no amount of humility or desperation could change that. James smiled, the faintest hint of pride in his expression. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Fitzroy. I hope you understand now." As he walked out of the gallery, James felt a sense of closure. He had nothing to prove to Gregory Fitzroy. The success he had achieved was a testament to his resilience, his talent, and the truth that art could not be confined to the narrow views of one man. The Revenge. The artist as a patron. James Whittaker's rise in the art world had been nothing short of meteoric, and now, as a celebrated figure, he found himself in a position of unprecedented power. No longer did he have to rely on galleries and their gatekeepers. He had achieved success on his own terms, and his name was synonymous with authenticity, inclusivity, and artistic innovation. His paintings were exhibited in the world's most prestigious venues, and collectors clamored to purchase his work. But James's success wasn't just about him, it was about something much bigger. Having been rejected by the art establishment early in his career, he understood how difficult it was to be seen, to be recognized, especially for artists who did not fit the mold of the traditional elite. He had experienced firsthand how hard it was for diverse voices to be heard in an industry dominated by narrow-minded gatekeepers. In a bold move that would send ripples through the art world, James decided to purchase Gregory Fitzroy's gallery, the very same place where he had been mocked and dismissed years earlier. With the acquisition, James didn't just want to own a building, he wanted to change the very fabric of the art world. He transformed the gallery into a space that would not only showcase his own work, but also serve as a platform for underrepresented artists, particularly those from marginalized communities. The gallery was rebranded as the Whittaker Gallery, and it quickly became a beacon for fresh talent. James used his wealth and influence to bring in artists from all backgrounds, giving them the opportunity to showcase their work in a space that was supportive, inclusive, and free from the elitist barriers that had once shut him out. The Whittaker Gallery was a place where art could be appreciated for its authenticity, its emotional power, and its ability to provoke thought, without the constraints of traditional expectations. As the gallery flourished, James also became a mentor to many young, struggling artists. He took them under his wing, helping them navigate the often toxic art world, and providing them with the resources they needed to thrive. For James, it was no longer just about personal success, it was about uplifting others, creating a legacy that would reshape the art industry for generations to come. His gallery became a launchpad for artists who had been overlooked, giving them the chance to find their own voices and achieve the recognition they deserved. James's vision was clear: art should be for everyone, regardless of race, background, or social status. He was determined to challenge the long-standing structures of the art world and replace them with something more inclusive, more representative of the diverse world in which we live. The Revenge. The artist as a patron. James Whittaker's rise in the art world had been nothing short of meteoric, and now, as a celebrated figure, he found himself in a position of unprecedented power. No longer did he have to rely on galleries and their gatekeepers. He had achieved success on his own terms, and his name was synonymous with authenticity, inclusivity, and artistic innovation. His paintings were exhibited in the world's most prestigious venues, and collectors clamored to purchase his work. But James's success wasn't just about him, it was about something much bigger. Having been rejected by the art establishment early in his career, he understood how difficult it was to be seen, to be recognized, especially for artists who did not fit the mold of the traditional elite. He had experienced firsthand how hard it was for diverse voices to be heard in an industry dominated by narrow-minded gatekeepers. In a bold move that would send ripples through the art world, James decided to purchase Gregory Fitzroy's gallery, the very same place where he had been mocked and dismissed years earlier. With the acquisition, James didn't just want to own a building, he wanted to change the very fabric of the art world. He transformed the gallery into a space that would not only showcase his own work, but also serve as a platform for underrepresented artists, particularly those from marginalized communities. The gallery was rebranded as the Whitaker Gallery, and it quickly became a beacon for fresh talent. James used his wealth and influence to bring in artists from all backgrounds, giving them the opportunity to showcase their work in a space that was supportive, inclusive, and free from the elitist barriers that had once shut him out. The Whitaker Gallery was a place where art could be appreciated for its authenticity, its emotional power, and its ability to provoke thought, without the constraints of traditional expectations. As the gallery flourished, James also became a mentor to many young, struggling artists. He took them under his wing, helping them navigate the often toxic art world, and providing them with the resources they needed to thrive. For James, it was no longer just about personal success, it was about uplifting others, creating a legacy that would reshape the art industry for generations to come. His gallery became a launchpad for artists who had been overlooked, giving them the chance to find their own voices and achieve the recognition they deserved. James's vision was clear: art should be for everyone, regardless of race, background, or social status. He was determined to challenge the long-standing structures of the art world and replace them with something more inclusive, more representative of the diverse world in which we live.